Sometimes life has this cruel way of placing you in the very room where your worth is questioned the most, where people who should be lifting you up are the very ones tearing you down. That's exactly what happened to me on that unforgettable evening, the family meeting that I thought was just a normal gathering but turned into the kind of moment that scars your heart forever, at least it would have, if not for what came after. I remember walking into the living room, the smell of strong tea mixed with the faint scent of fried onions coming from the kitchen, the hum of the ceiling fan, and the sound of my uncle's laughter already echoing before I had even entered. Everyone was there, my cousins sitting in a circle, my aunt whispering something sharp into my mother's ear, and the elders sitting in a way that looked more like a council than a family get-together. I could feel my palms sweating, not because I had done anything wrong, but because deep down I always sensed that these family meetings were less about bonding and more about judgment, a stage where some people would shine and others would be humiliated. And as always, I felt like I was about to be put on trial. It started with small talk, about jobs, about houses, about who just bought a new car, about whose son had just been promoted, and whose daughter got into a medical school. Every word carried this weight, like a hidden comparison that pressed harder on me than on anyone else in that room. I sat there, quiet, sipping water slowly, just to avoid eye contact. But it didn't take long before the questions found their way to me. "So, what are you doing now?" my uncle asked, though his tone didn't sound like he really wanted to know. It sounded like bait, like a trap waiting for me to step into. Before I could even answer, another voice jumped in, my cousin, with a smirk. "Still nothing, I guess." And the room erupted with soft chuckles that weren't soft at all. They were sharp, cutting, meant to remind me of where I stood in their hierarchy. Nowhere. I laughed too, nervously, trying to shrug it off, but inside my chest something tightened, because this wasn't the first time I had heard that. It had become the label they stuck to me like a tag I couldn't rip off. Useless. I wanted to speak up, to defend myself, to explain that just because my path didn't look like theirs didn't mean it was meaningless. But before I could, my aunt leaned forward, her voice dripping with pity and sarcasm at the same time. "At this age, you should be helping your parents, not sitting around. Look at your cousins, they're already making a name for themselves. What do you have to show?" Her words were knives, and what hurt more was the way my own parents stayed quiet, like maybe they agreed, like maybe they too had lost faith in me. My mother's eyes avoided mine. My father coughed into his hand as if clearing his throat was more important than defending his child, and that silence, it screamed louder than any insult in the room. The chorus continued. My cousins' achievements were listed out like trophies on display, my failures highlighted like stains that couldn't be cleaned. Someone mentioned how I never kept a job for long. Another joked that maybe I was waiting for a miracle to come knocking at my door. Every word was a hammer, and I sat there like the nail they were all determined to drive deeper into the wood. I smiled, I nodded, I played along, but inside I was shrinking, collapsing into myself, wondering if maybe they were right, if maybe I really was useless. And yet, beneath all that humiliation, there was something else, something burning, something stubborn that refused to die. That's when it happened, the moment that changed everything. My uncle, with that smug tone he always used, said, "We're all here trying to build something, trying to make the family proud. But some people," his eyes cut to me, "they just sit around, like dead weight." The word dead weight stung so deep that I actually clenched my fists under the table. And then, as if fate itself couldn't stand the injustice, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out quickly, more out of reflex than interest. And there it was, the message, the one that reminded me of what I had been hiding all along, what none of them knew, what I hadn't even dared to say because I wanted the right moment. My heart raced, and for the first time that night, I sat up straight. They called me useless, but they had no idea what was inside the envelope I carried with me, the envelope I had kept folded carefully, waiting, holding back, because I knew the day would come when the truth would silence them all. And so I let them keep talking, let them have their laughs, let them dig the hole deeper, because when I opened that envelope, when the truth came spilling out, none of them would laugh again. What they didn't know was that the label they stamped on me, useless, was about to be shattered into pieces so small it could never be put back together again. And I promise you this, the look on their faces, the way the air shifted in that room, it was something I'll never forget. But before I tell you what was inside, let me take you through the storm I had to endure leading up to that night. because only then will you understand why that envelope meant everything. When you've been called useless enough times, the word doesn't just sting, it becomes like a shadow that follows you everywhere, whispering in your ear, even when no one else is around. And I'll be honest, there were nights I believed them. I'd lie awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of my room, wondering if maybe I really was destined to be the disappointment of the family. I wasn't like my cousins who seemed to glide through life, ticking all the right boxes: degrees, jobs, promotions, marriages, children. I was the one who stumbled, who tried things and failed, who had dreams too big for my pockets, ideas too strange for anyone else to understand. But what they didn't know, what I never told them, was that every stumble taught me something. Every failure carved me into someone stronger, someone who refused to stay on the ground, no matter how hard the fall was. I wasn't useless, I was just on a different path. And that path, though rough and lonely, was about to lead me somewhere none of them could have imagined. I remembered the years before that meeting, the way people looked at me when I quit another job. They thought I couldn't handle pressure, but the truth was, I couldn't handle cages. Every time I was forced to sit behind a desk doing something that drained me, I felt like I was suffocating. I wasn't lazy. I was searching, desperately, searching for the thing that made my soul come alive. I spent nights reading books no one else cared about, learning skills no one thought were valuable, experimenting with ideas that often ended in disaster. And yes, I hid it. Because how do you explain to your family that you're chasing something invisible, something you can't even name yet? How do you make them understand that not all success looks like a shiny car or a fat paycheck? So I stayed quiet, endured their scorn, and carried on building in silence. But silence has a way of making people think you're doing nothing. They didn't see the hours I poured into teaching myself things I was never taught in school. They didn't see the failures that broke me and the small victories that stitched me back together. They didn't see the nights I sat alone in the glow of a laptop screen, eyes burning, fingers trembling as I typed, deleted, tried again, determined to create something that mattered. They didn't see the sacrifices, the hunger, the loneliness, the way I sold things I loved just to keep going. They only saw the surface, and on the surface, I was still the same quiet figure sitting in the corner at family gatherings, nodding, smiling, contributing nothing of value. That's why the word useless stuck so easily. It matched the picture they had painted of me. And yet, there was something deep inside me that never stopped whispering, just wait. I can't explain it, but it was like a fire that refused to go out. Every insult was fuel, every comparison was another log thrown into the flames. They thought they were breaking me, but they were sharpening me, pushing me closer to the moment where all the pain would flip into power. And as I sat there that night, in that suffocating living room filled with judgment, I could feel the weight of all those years pressing on me, but also lifting me, preparing me for what was about to unfold. Because in my pocket wasn't just an envelope, it was the proof of everything I had worked for, everything they couldn't see. It was the answer to every insult they had ever thrown at me. I kept touching it, running my fingers along the edge of the envelope, feeling the thickness of the paper, the heaviness of what it carried. It wasn't just ink on a page, it was my redemption, my vindication, my voice after years of being silenced. But I didn't take it out yet. No, I wanted them to finish. I wanted them to say every cruel word, to laugh their last laughs, to believe for just a few more minutes that I was nothing. Because when the truth came out, the silence would be sweeter than anything I had ever dreamed of. So I sat there, staring at the faces around me, memorizing the way their mouths curled when they mocked me, the way their eyes flicked with superiority, the way they leaned back in their chairs as if they were above me. They didn't know it yet, but all of that was about to collapse. And in that silence between their ears, my mind traveled back through the hardest parts of my journey, moments I had never shared with anyone, the nights I went without food, just to save enough to keep my project alive, the friends who abandoned me because they thought I was wasting my time, the rejection emails that piled up so high I stopped counting, the day I almost gave up completely, sitting on a park bench with tears I couldn't control, telling myself maybe they were right, maybe I really was useless. But then I remembered something my father had once said when I was very young, before life hardened him into the silent man he had become. The world laughs at the seed, but it's only because they can't imagine the tree. That line had stayed with me, and though he himself had long stopped encouraging me, I held on to his words as if they were the last rope keeping me from falling. And that rope carried me here, to this moment, where the laughter was loud but my silence was louder, because I knew what was coming. So while they mocked, I smiled. While they compared, I nodded. While they tore me down, I held my secret close, because the truth was, useless was just a word they gave me, but the envelope was about to give me a new name, one they would never forget. And in that moment, I felt something shift. I wasn't the scared, humiliated version of myself anymore. I was standing at the edge of a revelation. And the power wasn't in their hands, it was in mine. The thing about family is that they know exactly where to cut. You, strangers can throw insults, but they bounce off family, though they know the soft spots, the unhealed wounds, the exact words that hit like knives. And that night, sitting in that crowded living room, I felt every knife. My uncle, the judge of success, leaned forward and said, "Do you realize how embarrassing it is for us? People ask what you're doing, and what do we tell them? Nothing. We can't even explain your life because you don't have one." His words were laced with disdain, but what burned more was the way my cousins nodded in agreement, like it was some undeniable truth. I sat there, still holding on to my secret, still keeping my composure, but inside me something was unraveling. Memories flashing like lightning in a storm, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every time I fought against despair. It all collided in that moment, and I realized something. They weren't just attacking me, they were attacking every version of me that had survived. I thought about the countless hours I had spent trying to prove myself in silence, the side jobs I picked up to fund my passion projects, the nights I walked home because I couldn't afford the bus fare, the moments when my stomach growled but I told myself hunger was just fuel. I thought about the notebooks filled with scribbles, ideas, blueprints of something bigger, something worth building, even if no one believed in it but me. And while they mocked me, I remembered the moments of almost giving up, almost breaking, almost becoming the very thing they said I was. But each time, something pulled me back. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was the belief that I was meant for something more. But whatever it was, it had carried me this far, and as their laughter filled the room, I held on to that thought like armor. "Maybe he just doesn't have what it takes," one cousin said with a smirk, sipping tea as if dismissing my entire existence was casual entertainment. Another chimed in, "Some people are just born like that. They don't achieve much, and that's fine. But at least don't burden the rest of us." I could see the pride swelling in their words, as if stepping on me made them taller. I wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, to shove the envelope in their faces right there and then, but I didn't, because timing mattered. Because letting them finish meant the silence after would be heavier, sweeter, unforgettable. So I just smiled faintly, as if their words didn't matter, while my fingers brushed against the envelope in my pocket, feeling the edge of my redemption pressing against my skin. And in those minutes, while they threw their words like stones, my mind drifted back to the beginning of the journey I had hidden from them. The first spark had come years ago, when I realized I couldn't live a life boxed in by their expectations. I had taken a risk, a leap into the unknown, choosing to invest my time and energy into something no one else could see. It was lonely, terrifying, and most of all, it was invisible to the eyes of those who measured success only by paychecks and titles. But I kept going, driven by an inner voice that whispered louder than their laughter. And that voice was right, because eventually, the invisible started taking shape. Eventually, my failures began stacking into lessons, my lessons into strategies, my strategies into results, and those results, printed in black ink, lay folded in that envelope I guarded like my life depended on it. But they didn't know any of this. To them, I was still the family disappointment, the silent one who had nothing to show. They compared me to cousins who flaunted their cars and jobs, who spoke loudly about achievements that impressed the room. They measured my worth by material things, blind to the fact that sometimes the biggest victories can't be worn or parked in the driveway. And while they judged me, I judged them too, not out of spite, but out of clarity. I realized they had built their worlds on approval, on fitting into molds, while I had carved mine out of resistance, out of daring to step into the unknown. And in that realization, I found strength. Because even though they didn't see me, I saw myself. Still, their words weren't easy to bear. "He's wasting his life," my aunt muttered, shaking her head, as if I were a stain on the family name. Another cousin laughed. Maybe he's waiting for a miracle like money will just fall from the sky. Their laughter rolled again, and I let it, knowing it would be the last time. I let them believe in their superiority for a few more breaths, knowing soon the ground beneath them would shift. And in that moment, something inside me changed. I no longer felt like the victim of their judgment. I felt like the keeper of a secret they weren't ready for. The word useless didn't pierce me anymore. It echoed in the room, yes, but it bounced off me because I knew the truth. And truth, hidden in that envelope, was heavier than every insult combined. So I sat straighter, my silence growing louder, my patience turning into power, because I knew the time was coming. The envelope wasn't just paper, it was the turning point of my life, the revelation that would silence them forever. And as they laughed, I thought, keep going. Mock me all you want. This is your last chance to do it, because once the envelope opened, there would be no going back. It's strange, isn't it, how people can sit in the same room as you, share the same blood, eat the same food, and yet look at you as if you're a stranger who doesn't belong. That's exactly how I felt as the meeting stretched on, as my relatives continued dissecting my life, like surgeons who had already declared me beyond saving. Every sentence was a reminder that in their eyes, I wasn't just behind, I was finished. A failure written off before I even had the chance to prove myself. He's the kind who always dreams, but never does, one cousin muttered, and the others laughed in agreement. My aunt sighed loudly, almost theatrically, saying, sometimes you just have to accept reality. Not everyone is meant to succeed. Her words hung in the air like poison, and I glanced around the room, trying to find even one face that would defend me, but no one did. My parents stayed quiet, my siblings kept their eyes down, and I sat there realizing that I was utterly alone, least in their eyes, but what they didn't realize was that solitude had been my teacher all along, and loneliness had sharpened me into something stronger than they could imagine, that as their voices blended into a chorus of judgment, my mind drifted back to the darkest days of my journey, the days that had nearly broken me, but also rebuilt me. I remembered sitting in a dimly lit room with nothing but a borrowed laptop and an idea I couldn't let go of. I remembered how I poured my energy into it, failing again and again, but refusing to walk away. I remembered the nights I cried quietly, praying for just one sign that I wasn't wasting my life, and the mornings I got up anyway, pushing forward despite the emptiness in my pockets and the doubt in my heart. I remembered the letters of rejection that piled up like a cruel collection, the friends who laughed behind my back, the neighbors who whispered that I was nothing but a burden, and yet, through it all, I kept going, driven by the belief that one day, one moment, would make it all worth it. And that moment was sitting in my pocket, wrapped in a simple envelope they dismissed as meaningless. I looked around the room, studying each face, memorizing the way their confidence shone when they spoke about their jobs, their houses, their so-called achievements, but I saw something they didn't fear. They needed validation. They needed applause. They needed to flaunt their success in order to feel like it mattered. And here I was, sitting silently with nothing to show on the surface, yet everything to reveal beneath it. I realized then that their laughter wasn't power, it was weakness disguised as pride. And that realization gave me calm, a steady fire that replaced the shame I once felt, because I knew that when the truth came out, it wouldn't just silence them, it would expose the fragility of the pedestal they stood on. Still, they didn't stop. You're wasting everyone's time, my uncle spat, his voice rising now, as if my very presence offended him. You've done nothing. You've achieved nothing. You're dragging your parents down with you. His words were cruel, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I let my hand rest fully on the envelope, pressing against it like it was the anchor keeping me grounded. I wanted to laugh. Not out of joy but out of irony, because while he called me nothing, I held in my hand the proof that I was something. Something more than any of them had imagined. But I stayed silent, because silence was my weapon. Silence gave me control. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless in that room. I felt like the storm they didn't see coming. The clock ticked, the fan hummed, the air grew heavier with every insult. But I didn't break. I let them build their wall of words higher and higher, knowing that I was holding the wrecking ball. And as I sat there, I thought of all the times I had almost given up, the moment I stood at the edge of despair, thinking maybe ending it all would be easier than fighting against a world that only saw my failures, the moment I stared into the darkness of my room, asking myself why I even bothered. But then I remembered the faces of those who mocked me, the way their laughter had cut deeper than any blade, and I told myself, no, I will not give them the satisfaction. I will rise, and they will choke on their own words. That promise had carried me here, to this very night, and now, the envelope was the embodiment of that promise. A weapon disguised as paper. I don't think they realized how close they were to being undone. They thought they had me pinned, thought their words still carried weight, thought they had won. But as I sat there, smiling faintly, calm in the face of their mockery, I saw confusion flicker in some of their eyes. They didn't understand why I wasn't crumbling like before. They didn't understand why the word useless didn't sting anymore. They didn't know that in a few moments, their laughter would turn into silence, their pride into shock, their superiority into shame, and I, the one they called useless, would be the one to expose them all. So I waited, patient, steady, calm, because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't in shouting back, but in letting the truth speak for itself. And soon, very soon, the truth would unfold from the envelope, and everything they thought they knew about me would be destroyed in an instant. The moment stretched on, like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap at any second. My uncle's voice boomed once more, his words heavy with finality. I don't know why we even bother. Some people are destined to stay failures, and nothing will change that. His declaration rang in my ears, and I could see heads nodding, hear soft murmurs of agreement rippling around the room. That was it. That was the moment they sealed their judgment of me, the final nail in the coffin of their perception. They thought the trial was over, the verdict delivered, the case closed, but they didn't know that the evidence that would overturn it all was sitting right there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for me to pull it out. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from anticipation. My hand slid into my pocket, fingertips brushing the edge of the envelope once again. The texture of the paper felt almost electric now, humming with the weight of what it carried. I took a slow breath, steadying myself, because I knew that once it left my pocket, there would be no going back. But before I could move, they kept going, as if determined to crush whatever dignity I had left. He's not even trying, one cousin sneered. Look at him, just sitting there quietly, like he's invisible. Does he think silence will turn into success? Another added, even if he gets a job tomorrow, it won't matter. He's too far behind. The rest of us are moving forward, building futures, while he's stuck in the same place. Their words were harsh, but for the first time, I didn't feel the sting. Instead, I felt almost grateful, because the deeper they cut, the sweeter the silence would be when the truth emerged. And that silence, it was coming, closer and closer, like a storm rolling over the horizon. I thought back to the day I had received the envelope. It hadn't come easily. It was the result of years of relentless struggle, countless rejections, and a stubborn refusal to give up. I remembered opening the email first, my heart racing as I read the words I had been waiting for, the words that validated everything I had fought for in silence. I remembered printing out the letter, sliding it carefully into the envelope, and carrying it with me like a talisman, like a shield against the world's judgment. I hadn't told anyone, not my parents, not my friends, not a single soul, because I wanted the right moment. And now, here it was, delivered on a silver platter by their mockery. This wasn't just about proving myself. This was about reclaiming my name, my dignity, my place in the family that had written me off as useless. My hand tightened around the envelope, and slowly, I pulled it out, placing it on the table in front of me. Instantly, the room grew quieter. Not silent, but curious. Their eyes flicked toward the envelope, brows furrowing, lips curling in confusion. One cousin chuckled. What's that? Another rejection letter. His laughter echoed, but it was weaker now, uncertain, because something in my demeanor had shifted. I wasn't slouched anymore. I wasn't shrinking into myself. I was sitting tall, calm, steady, as if I finally had the upper hand. And in truth, I did. I let the envelope sit there for a moment, untouched, letting the suspense grow, letting their curiosity deepen. I wanted them to feel it, to sense that something was about to happen. And then, slowly, deliberately, I slid my finger under the flap and opened it. The sound of tearing paper cut through the room like a blade, sharper than any insult they had thrown at me. All eyes were on me now. The laughter stopped. The smirks faded. Even my uncle leaned forward, his face tightening with curiosity, maybe even unease. That inside was the letter, folded neatly, crisp and clean. I pulled it out with steady hands, unfolding it carefully, savoring the moment. My heart raced, but my face remained calm, almost serene. And then I began to read. My voice was clear, steady, each word carrying the weight of years of struggle, each line silencing the room further. The letter wasn't just words on a page, it was proof, undeniable proof, that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. Proof that I had been building something all along, something bigger than their narrow definitions of success. And as I read aloud, I could see the shift in their faces, the confusion, the disbelief, the dawning realization that everything they thought they knew about me was wrong. When I finished, the silence was absolute. No laughter, no smirks, no snide comments. Just silence. The kind of silence that hangs heavy in the air, thick with shock and shame. I folded the letter slowly, deliberately, and placed it back in the envelope, sliding it across the table as if to say, "There it is, the truth you never saw." My uncle's face had gone pale. My cousins avoided my eyes. My aunt looked like she had swallowed her own words. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the kind that comes from money or status, but the kind that comes from finally being seen, from finally being vindicated after years of being dismissed. But I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. The silence was enough. The looks on their faces were enough. The envelope had spoken louder than I ever could. And in that moment, the word useless disintegrated into dust, never to touch me again. When the air finally settled, I realized that something had shifted inside me. I wasn't just the boy they had called useless anymore. I was the man who had walked into the fire of ridicule and come out stronger. It wasn't even about the inheritance anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could stand in front of people who had doubted me my whole life and not flinch. In the weeks that followed, my cousins kept their distance. Not out of respect, but out of a kind of wary confusion. They didn't know how to deal with the version of me that refused to shrink. My parents, however, seemed to wake up. My father, who had always been stern and distant, started to call me not often. Not with flowery words, but enough to show me that he was making an effort. My mother, on the other hand, carried guilt in her eyes. She would ask me if I needed anything, or if I was eating well, as if all the years of neglect had just dawned on her. And yet, I didn't let bitterness consume me. Instead, I threw myself into the project my grandfather had outlined. It was messy at first. I didn't have experience in setting up something of that scale. But every late night, every failure, every mistake felt like a hammer striking away the last remnants of the useless label. I partnered with people who believed in the vision. People who had once been in my shoes, overlooked and underestimated. Slowly, piece by piece, it began to grow. The family, of course, watched from a distance, never openly admitting their curiosity, but I could feel their eyes on me whenever they heard my name in business circles. For the first time, the silence around me wasn't suffocating, it was powerful, because it meant they had nothing left to say. The real turning point, however, came exactly 1 year later. At the next annual family meeting, I walked into that same room, the one that had once swallowed me whole with humiliation. But this time I carried myself differently. I didn't wear the weight of their opinions. I wore my own sense of achievement. The envelope had been more than a lifeline, it had been a mirror, forcing me to confront who I was and who I wanted to be. As I took my seat, my uncle glanced at me with something like caution in his eyes. My cousins avoided direct eye contact, but their fidgeting told me everything I needed to know. They knew I had changed. And then, when it was my turn to speak, I didn't bring documents or make grand announcements. I simply shared the story of how the foundation had started, how it was already helping hundreds of people rebuild their lives, and how my grandfather's belief in me had become the driving force behind something bigger than all of us. The room fell silent again, but this silence was not mocking. It was respect. For the first time in my life, I saw my father's eyes glisten with something that looked like pride, and in that moment, I realized the truth. Sometimes, the harshest words spoken against you are not meant to break you, but to ignite you. They called me useless, but that night, standing in the glow of my own hard-earned purpose, I knew I had rewritten the story of my life forever.